Yeah, if you're business people or intellectuals, you're the bottom of the caste system, and then that affects everything. It affects what kind of job you can get, what kind of pay you allow, even on the same job, and what kind of school your children can go to. So in my parents' case, my father and my mom, despite whatever their academic performance, the best school they can go to is teachers' college. So that reaches what they went, and so both my parents are secondary school teachers.
And it seems like in Chinese society, teachers would be held at high esteem, but yet at the same time, you say that intellectuals and business people, the only school they could get into is the teachers' college. That almost seems backwards somehow.
I guess historically, teachers are very well respected, and so culturally it is very well respected. But obviously, especially in the '60s, my parents was paid at today's exchange would be something like $5 US a month, and
Wow.
so you don't get much pay. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So they might be respected, but they're not respected to the point where people are willing to put their money where their mouth is. That's from the
Yeah.
sound of it.
Even today, actually, even in today's China, the pay is very, very low. What they got is they got actually a lot of what you call it, like essentially, you may call it bribery or you pocket money from the parents. And then you do a lot of tutoring on your side, and that's where the bulk of your income. It's not your official job. And then back in the 30, 40, 50 years ago, that is no such thing. That's no side job.
Right, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So now teachers pay still low, but they take side hustles and maybe, I guess, do you call it a bribe or is it more like, thanks for doing a good job with my kid, here's an extra $1,000 for the year? I don't know what you would call that.
Yeah, that's but that
A
is
tip?
but it's yeah, it's a tip, but it's a lot of tip, and actually, to the point now that the parents who tip more would have the children got extra care,
Yeah.
and then they will
So that's
let
a
you
bribe.
know if not tipping enough through your children.
Right, like, hey, your son failed the test. I don't know why, because you never pay me any money. But if you pay me money, maybe he won't fail the next test and maybe he'll understand chemistry.
They wouldn't speak out, to such extent, but you get a hint.
Yeah, yeah, you can read between the lines. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
So we have to keep things kind of fast. So I'm blowing through some details here, if you'll forgive me. But you moved from China to Hong Kong as a kid after Mao dies, and it sounded like you moved because people couldn't leave China while Mao was alive, and maybe people saw some of the writing on the wall when Mao died and tried to get out. Is that kind of the story there?
Well, we got to move because my mom's father, so my maternal grandfather, was living in Hong Kong. So we used that as an excuse. We used that as an excuse for application to visit relatives. And obviously, in '70s in China, if you get out of China to visit on whatever excuse, you never return. But it was a long application process. I think it took like 3-4 years for my parents to get the permission to visit my maternal grandfather in Hong Kong, and that's how we get out of Hong Kong. Get out of China.
Wow. And you mentioned kind of growing up after that in Hong Kong in, I guess I won't sugarcoat it, kind of the ghetto. Like you kind of lived in some dicey housing areas from the sound of it.
Yeah, it was true. I mean, when we first got to Hong Kong, in the book I talk about my mom crossed the border between Hong Kong and China with essentially what $2 US in her pocket,
Wow.
and we went to take shelter essentially with my maternal grandfather, and my father came to join us a year after we arrived Hong Kong, and then it was 8 people in a 700 square feet apartment, 3 generations, and I was sleeping on a sofa bed in the living room. My parents has a bed on a sort of corner of the living room. So that's how we started. Yeah.
Yeah, when you think about 700 square feet and 8 people, no such thing as privacy. If you got to go to the bathroom, you might as well. I mean, it's just you got nothing. Like that, you're just always packed in there. And it's a wild way to live. I mean, going from where you were to where you ended up is quite a feat. Tell me about watching the Tiananmen Square massacre on TV. You write about that as a kind of a defining moment. Actually, describe briefly what that is, because I think a lot of folks, they only have heard of it and aren't really sure what it is.
So Tiananmen Square, what happened was 89. So China has an opening essentially in 1978. The reason you call it opening is the reason they went on this opening reform path wasn't because the CCP, the China Communist Party, the CCP changed their mind. They said, we want to embrace the world. We want to like to be like the West. It was because the state was absolutely bankrupt. They have no choice but let the president say, well, you decide what you want to grow, and then you can sell whatever you grow into the market. And then they let small entrepreneurs say, well, we cannot feed you anymore. All the state-owned companies are bankrupting. So why don't you go out and then you can open your corner shop? That was today we call it a reform opening, but essentially in 1978, that's what happened. That was the state of China. And then so by 1989, it was about a decade after the sort of quote unquote reform opening, and it was rampant corruption. So the start of it was a protest of rampant corruption. And so you have mass protests across China in all major cities. And then you have the entire population participating. It was actually protesting against corruption. And then you have the student getting involved. And once the student gets involved, and then you have obviously the Berlin Wall coming down at the same time, then the student leading the charge and say, we want democracy. We want to look at what's happening in Eastern Europe, what's happening in Soviet Union. They are all changing the form of government. And then those are all ruled by the Communist Party. We want the same change. We want the same thing, and that was the beginning of it. Obviously, in the West, not the West, the Eastern Europe and Soviet Union, the government basically said, well, we don't want to open fire on the population. We give up, right? Mm-hmm. But in China case, the Communist Party said, well, we want to keep the power and we don't mind opening up fire on population. So you have essentially armies surrounding Beijing, and then on June 4th, deep in the night of June 4th, you have tanks rolling into, and they cut the power of the Tiananmen Square, which is the biggest public square of China in China. And you have I think you have tens of thousands of students essentially camping out. Like the Wall Street protests, they're camping out in the Tiananmen Square and occupying the square with their protests. And then essentially you have armies surrounding it and moving in, opening fire on the students, and tanks rolling in. And supposedly, a lot of people will see the poster of the tank man, right?
Right, the tank man.
Yeah, in the deep in the night, the tanks actually roll over people.
So most Chinese are not willing to discuss this. I know you live in the UK, so it's different. But when I ask Chinese people about this who are in China, they'll say something like, I don't know anything about it. I haven't really heard about it. Or my parents told me about it, but not really any details. Or sometimes people will say, my uncle went and we never saw him again. But nobody really seems to want to talk about it at all, or even really know any details about it at all. And when I show them the Tank Man photo, one of the most famous photos in the world, if you Google Tank Man, you'll immediately recognize it. People have said, my Chinese friends I'm talking to them on Skype, they go, I've never seen this in my life. And I don't think they're lying. They really haven't ever seen that photo because you can't find it on the Chinese internet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the most important things for the Communist Party is controlling the storyline. Mm-hmm. That's and the book 1984, right? That's the line that the person who control the past control the present, the present control the future, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the most important things for the Communist Party of China is controlling the storyline, controlling the history. So essentially, entire modern Chinese history is whitewashed. I mean entirely, the entirety of it. And 89, obviously, it was brushed off, and then never to be, if you look at any books in China published, any books, you go to a bookstore, tens of thousands of books in the bookstore, there would not be a single book, a single paragraph mentioning Tiananmen Square June 4th, 1989. not a single paragraph. And then obviously it's a completely wash off on the Chinese internet. So, I mean, it is true. I mean, majority of the people born in the last 30 years would never heard of this term. And the people who, and then the parents don't want to, get them into trouble. They don't want to talk about it. So that generation, last 30 people in the last 30 years would never, essentially last 30 years never heard of this thing. And the people who heard of it, experienced it in China, don't want to talk about it because there will be a repercussion if you get heard, you talk publicly about it.
I think that's a good sort of preview because you're watching this live on TV while you're in Hong Kong, and people in China then and now, unless you were there, haven't heard about it. Like, it's completely absent from history. It's really amazing. Yeah. It's really something else, and it sort of gives you a preview into some of what we're going to talk about here in a minute, which is you started to see corruption. You get into high finance in Hong Kong. You're not very good at it. I can relate to that. I was in high finance on Wall Street, had no idea what the hell was going on. And you start to see corruption, right? And some of the examples you give are the Communist Party's Navy smuggling beer, which is kind of pathetic and funny, but also really like, what's the status if your armed forces are in the bootlegging business? I mean, that's really kind of like a low rent way to generate revenue, but it's almost like a metaphor for the whole thing.
So yeah, just continue on, like I talk about the state was completely bankrupt in 1978, and that's why they started this quote unquote reform and opening. So and because the state's bankrupt, the army is allowed to go into business and to essentially generate revenue to feed itself. So the army has been for a long time, for almost 20 years, in all sort of business, from real estate development to any sort you can think of. So I went back to Hong Kong after graduating from Madison, Wisconsin, and very soon I was in private equity. I was in the business at the beginning of the industry essentially. I mean, today we talk about like hundreds, if not thousands, of private equity firms in China. But at that time, beginning of the 90s, you almost can count by a single hand how many firms there is. So I was with a U.S. firm, and then one of the business we invested. One of the business line we invest in fast-moving consumer goods. So they have one of the main business line was Heineken beer. So they were the importer and distributor of Heineken beer into China. So we essentially, that firm grew Heineken from zero revenue, I think in probably 3 years to 30 million in revenue. And I was assigned by the private equity firm to sit on a board representing the investment firm on that distribution company. And then it essentially, because we are American firm, we don't want to get our hands anywhere close to all this dirty money flow. Mm-hmm. So what we want to do is we tell the management is like, okay, we take the beer, in Hong Kong. You guys figure out how you guys ship it into China. And then we don't want to, this is a black box to us. Somehow we get the beer to you, hand it off in Hong Kong, and somehow it mysteriously reappears somewhere in China. And what happened in between is a black box we don't want to know anything about, right? But I sit on the board, and then I talk to management all the time, and then one of the time they come to me and say, well, some general from the Chinese Navy reach out to us and say, offer to ship the beer with their gunboats into China, and but obviously we need to pay them. I was astonished. I mean, yeah. I grew up in China when our first 10 years of my life was in China. You read all this comic book and telling you how heroic the Chinese, the PLA, People's Liberation Army, wars, during whether it's the quote unquote liberation of China or fighting the Japanese in the Second World War. And you just have this image of like, how great the military people are, and how dedicated they are, how much self-sacrifice they have been doing for the country. And then you sit on the board, and then you're like, oh, okay, they are offering to use gunboat to ship beers into China for pay.
Yeah,
it was quite stunning for me. I mean, it was an introduction class to me for me into the Chinese business world.
Yeah, some intro to the Chinese business world. Yeah, you say in the book the message from China was give us your freedom and we will make you rich. And there's all these gray areas in the laws so that people could always be targeted for corruption. So if you fall out of favor with those running the government, suddenly they slap you with corruption charges and you go to prison or you end up getting executed. And the game is dodge those penalties and dodge the actual rules that suckers play by and be 10 moves ahead. And you said when you met your wife, Whitney, she's like well-connected, has ambitious goals. She wasn't one move ahead, she was 10, and had all of the right connections to make things happen. And we kind of touched on the connections thing earlier, but anywhere where you need a ton of connections, like with the Communist Party, that breeds corruption, as we mentioned. But it seems like you almost, even the non-corrupt, have to become corrupted to succeed. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, just some more background, maybe on the legal system, why people are in the way they are, why things are operate the way it operates. First of all, there are several issues here. One is the law was by design to be fuzzy. So if you read any law, I mean, every law in China, you know, that's maybe like 10 crosses on that law, right? And the last one, inevitably the last one, is like as defined by the party or as defined by the authority. So that's in every law, there is escape clause. And that's intentionally there, to be there, so the authority can use the law as they see fit. So that's the first thing. So by design, the legal system is designed to be fuzzy, designed to be interject at the point as the authority see fit. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is the law is always changing, right? It's just, one of the most astonishing change we saw in the last few years is they changed the constitution. Now, all of a sudden, Xi Jinping can be president for life, right? I mean, you think of it. I mean, you can, just like, okay, snap a finger, I'm a dictator, now I want to be president for life, let's change the constitution. So the law is always changing. And then when they change the law, they allow, the most of the time, they can, as they fit, they can backdate, they can backdate the application of it. So essentially, if you're a business person, you are any person in China, the ground under your feet is constantly shifting. You're standing on not a solid ground. The ground is shifting under your feet. So by design and by application, the legal system is not something, in the West, we have, you have a law and we go to court and the law is very specific on where the red line is, right? And we go to the court and to argue, did I cross the red line or did I not cross the red line, right? So in China case, first of all, the red line is by design fuzzy. So you never know whether you cross it or not. The second thing is they draw new lines all the time. So, and then they backdate to apply it, so you can get caught no matter what. So as a business person or anybody who's trying to do anything in China, you're always dancing in the gray zone, because there's no black and white. You're always dancing in the gray zone. And then it's how do you dance in the gray zone? That's how essentially define your success.
Yeah, and that's not good because, of course, that breeds more corruption. We did a whole show on corruption with Brian Klass, episode 650, for people who want to hear about how corruption breeds more corruption. One thing I thought was really interesting, you mentioned, this is almost like a throwaway line in the book, but you mentioned that people in the party, the Communist Party, they go to separate schools, they shop at different stores, and you even said they get their food from a separate supply chain, which I think that's really interesting. Why is that the case? Is it safer food, better food, more reliable supply? What is it? What's the reason there?
So in the book, I call, that's a crust of society. I call them Red Aristocrats. So they are
Red Aristocracy, right?
Yes, Red Aristocracy and Red Aristocrats. They essentially by bloodline. It's by who their parents and who their grandparents are. At the beginning, at the formation of the party and the formation of the country. So, so Xi Jinping would not be president if his father is one of the top 10 generals at the founding of the nation in the 1940s. And then people And then it's go bloodline by bloodline. So his son will be somebody else. They got fast track and everything. Let's start where they're, first of all, when they're born, they are born in a different section of the hospital. So in Beijing, all major hospitals, there's a separate section for senior official. You only can go in to be treated in those sessions if you're vice minister and above.
Oh, wow.
So in the vice minister is considered high official in China. So people really fight for their status, because once you get that status, you in a medical case, you can go be treated in, and that's not, no money can buy you into the session. Okay, only connections and status can buy in, can get you treated in that session, and wow. that session is all en suite. I mean, I've been in there. It's all en suite. It's all 5-star setups. Okay, so when you're born in a different section of hospital from the rest of the country. Okay, and then when you go to a kindergarten, you go to a primary school. There are schools, and then in China, everybody know which are those schools. There are schools that only people like them are accepted. So they'll go to a different private school, kindergarten, different primary school, different secondary school, and just that's growing up. And that their family, you just talk about it. I mentioned in the book is they got, not just a separate food supply system. They have farms dedicated only grow for them.
Wow.
And then so it will be a different quality of food supply. And then even the liquor, China's drink this Mao-Tai, which is like a 53% proof, liquor, very, very strong. And even on the liquor, there are liquors specific, even on the bottle, it's a spare wow. It's a special supply for that class of people, for high officials.
Oh, wow. It says that on the bottle. They're not even trying to hide that.
It says on the bottle. No, it's no hiding. I mean, it's set on a bottle. So everything is a separate system. And then the car they ride in, I talk about it, and have a separate license plate. They will identify you to the police, who is the owner of the car and who possibly is riding in that car. So, we drive in the bike lane, we drive in the bus lane, no cop will, coffee will just wave you through.
Right, because
it's
untouchable.
Yeah,
you're like royalty. Yeah.
It is. It's the royalty and the aristocrats of the medieval times.
Wow. In a communist country, which is like the most freaking ironic, hypocritical nonsense ever. But yeah, that's no huge surprise there, I suppose. Okay, so your wife, Whitney, ends up being a confidant to somebody named Auntie Zheng, who's the wife of a very powerful Chinese politician. And you said you became like the birds that clean the alligator's teeth. What do you mean by that?
So Auntie Zhang is the wife of Wen Jiabao, who was the premier of China for a decade until Xi Jinping came on, in 2012. So how should I put it? Essentially, people like them, being the family of the premier, they are like kings or emperors holding courts. And then they have people like rushing and clamoring into their court and say, well, take me as your advisor, take me as your partner, take me as your server. And then they will basically look at all the people coming into their court. They say, well, okay, I will pick this guy to do this part of job for me. I will take this guy to take care of that business for me. And so you are, and then they can chop you off and send you away and or whatever. So that's, it is, and so you always need to be very, very careful. So you are on the good side of them. And then you always are competing with other people who are new to the court and want what the position you have. And that's what I mean when I say that.
Game of Thrones, man. That's what it sounds like.
Absolutely.
And she's giving you and it explains much more in the book, of course, which we'll link in the show notes, but she's giving you political cover to get projects done, real estate development, whatever it is, investments, insurance deals, things like that. And you give her 30% of the profit. And what she might do is say, hey, official that has to stamp something, you're going to stamp this thing, and we might give you a little bit of cash, or we might give you a preferred position. And she's brokering these deals and saying, this is my guy. You know, Desmond is my guy. Whitney is my gal. They're going to do this airport thing or this insurance deal, and you're going to let them. And these people are like, okay, thanks, Auntie Jung, because she's kind of like got the strings controlling the puppets because of who her husband is. Am I kind of on point here?
It doesn't really work like that. So what it has, what it has, I call it, they are the Air Force. They are she's the Air Force and we are the ground troops. So what does that mean? So she is like the Air Force, flying over the sky, a big powerful jet, and then everybody look up, say like, whoa, and then we need to move in to actually get things done and execute it. Because if you can do everything, she wouldn't take 30%, she would taking 90%, right? So reality is actually we provide bulk of the capital, we do all the executions, but you need her as a halo behind you. So when we need to work on an official not gonna just like bend over and say, oh, because you are the partner of the Wen family, we're going to sign this thing on the dotted line. Mm-hmm. No, they want many things. They want to negotiate, right? I want a promotion, or maybe I want a job in a different province, or maybe I want somebody to take care of my wife's promotion. They want many. Everybody want different things, and then you cannot give everything everybody wants.
Sure.
It's just impossible. So reality is actually they provide a halo. They provide a halo that, well, we can possibly get those things for you, right? And then we in the Newton, me and my wife and then the company we run, we actually need to work with them, whether, let's say the airport project, we built about 500,000 square meters, so it's like 6 million square feet of property. We need to get all that, built out. We put the money in. We need to get the chops, of approvals. But those chops approval, it's not possible without a halo. And then, but you have to do all that by yourself. So we are the ground trip doing the real execution, but you need that halo on your back.
That makes sense. Okay. And through the halo effect and a lot of hard work, you do this massive insurance deal. We'll sort of skip the details, but you turn what I guess is about 12 million into 100 million. Pretty nice return, but that's just the beginning. You mentioned the airport deal, which we'll get to in a bit here. But I thought it was interesting, by the way. You say when you get married, you had a small wedding outside of Beijing in order to hide your connections. Now, in the United States, where I am right now, you would have a big wedding where people could be seen and you can show off how important you are, and you got your connections and your boss and you got your mother-in-law and her family and friends, and you're doing the opposite. You're like, all right, we got to do this on the low so that nobody knows who we are connected to. And that's an interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah, I think that is very interesting. So there are several things, I can talk about here. So first of all, when I was writing the books, the publisher said, give me photos, right? Do you have photos? Wen Jiabao, the premiere, do you have how many photos? What are the photos you have with Auntie Jiang and, her sisters or parents or whatever? Like, give me photos, right? I was like, geez, I looked at my photo album. It's like, I don't have much photo, although we worked with them for a decade. It's like in China is, if you're that close, you don't want people to know. The people who, you go to a lot of lobby firm in DC, right? They have a photo of the guy, shaking hand with the vice premier or the premier of China, and they put in the lobby of the office, and then you're like, whoa, I'm coming to the right office to buy service, to open doors. People do photo ops and never the people who have real relationships. The real relationship, people like us, we don't want anybody else to know about it, and unless the people, we need them to know it. So
Yeah.
that's the first thing. The second thing is, the other thing is very interesting. If anybody is traveling to China, you go to any high-end restaurant in China, there's a lot of private rooms, like a lot more private rooms than anywhere else in the world. I give a story in a book that's the Beijing Hotel, one of the most high-end stay-on hotel, 5-star hotel in Beijing, right on the square of Tiananmen Square. On the top floor, there's an entire floor, about 20 rooms of private dining rooms. And in the 20 room, there's one room, that room has 3 persons. Their job is traffic control. So they want that. So you have 20 rooms, dining rooms. You possibly talking about 100 people in and out of that floor, right? Their job is make sure whoever is getting, when they come up to the floor, before they come into the room, when they leave the room, going downstairs, they don't run into anybody else. Because and that's how they do it. They essentially coordinate which dish serve when are you going to get your desserts, when you're going to get your bills, just make sure. And then when you step out of the room, they make sure the elevator is already there waiting for you, so you don't run into anybody. Although, a lot of high officials are dining at the same time on the same floor, but none of them will run into each other. It's because nobody wants to know who is cooking up some deals with whom.
Right. So so this is like all the people that you aren't supposed to necessarily be working with. You might be having a meal with them, but the last thing is you don't want to be seen with other government ministers or by other government ministers. And there's these 3 people who probably know a lot of stuff about a lot of people. And, those people are probably, would you say those people are in a pretty good position to maybe sell some of that information to people who want to know? That seems like a good position to be in.
I'm sure that some of them are really working for the state security people.
Yeah, like I think whatever China's FSB or CIA is or FBI, those people are all probably from there. Highest paid hosting job in the world, probably, at any restaurant.
Yeah, so on to my wedding. So what we do in Beijing is, it's very difficult, if we do a big banquet. First of all, who do we invite? You said when you invite these people, you are showing off your cards, like who you have your relationships with. You don't want that to happen. And then the second thing is, one table, in Chinese banquets, one table sits 12 or 10. And then usually the way it is the closer to the wedding couple, the table, who sits on the table closer to wedding couple have a closer relationship. The people who have, a more distant in relationship sit further away in the banquet hall. You don't want to show your hand like that. And it's very difficult, like who you put priority ahead of whom, right? Who's going to sit on table 1 and who's going to sit on table 2 and who's going to sit on table 3. You may offend people. You don't want to, get into this kind of trouble. So that's why, we never actually have a banquet of any just a small family thing. We never done a big one in Beijing. It's impossible to do a big one in Beijing given our situation.
Yeah, no, that completely makes sense. That's so interesting and so different from the United States. Hey, if you like what you're hearing and seeing, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There's a lot more just like this. You can find the Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to the show. The airport deal, right? You finance it with these sort of like state-owned, state-owned loans, and officials keep getting arrested for corruption. And one of the guys whose signatures you need ends up disappearing. It sounds insanely stressful the way you describe it in the book. You've got all these connections, the schmoozing, the guanxi, as they call it in Chinese, that you have to make and manage. And on top of that, it's like, yeah, we just need a signature from so-and-so. Oh, yeah, he got arrested and nobody knows where he is, and it's been months and we can't find him and nobody will tell us where he is. I mean, that's like almost like a very uniquely sort of Chinese problem of somebody getting arrested and vanishing.
Yeah, before we go into the airport situation and then the story you just talked about, let's talk about the insurance deal we did earlier. That was our first big score. And that was, essentially in about 2003, we invested in an insurance company, and as the insurance industry of China in that time was just happening. Today, we invest in this company called Ping An Insurance. Today, this company is either number one or number two biggest insurance company, in the world. They own 9.2% of HSBC. They're the biggest shareholder. They're the biggest shareholder of HSBC. And then that was the story that get, essentially get Whitney into trouble and get all of us into trouble, become a front page story on New York Times, and then brought our relationship open, with the Wen family. It was presented as a corruption deal, as a corrupted deal, because, I think we made something like 25, 30 times money on that deal. That is actually, but the reality is actually, it's like rear view mirror retrospectively say, oh, you make a lot of money. I'll tell you what, obviously, you go through the book and then you look at sort of the trajectory I was on. We basically come from nothing and then become billionaires. And in that process, obviously that's hard work. Obviously that's luck, but obviously that's being wise to the situation and all that. But a lot of it, I think I keep telling the young people, their parents send it to me, say, well, help my children and tell them the secret of your success. I say, well, hard work and wisdom give you a present, maybe upper middle class life, but and maybe a rich life. But to be extraordinarily wealthy, need luck. And now let me use that insurance deal as an example. So when we invest in the company, why did we invest? We don't know that. At that 2003, who the heck knows where China gonna be? Nobody imagined. I think at that time, 2003. 20 years later, today, China will be the second largest economy of the world. Nobody in the whole damn world imagined that, not even the Chinese themselves, right? And then the only reason we invested was because Goldman was in it. Morgan Stanley Goldman Sachs was in it. Morgan Stanley was in it. And then we heard HSBC going to come into it, in the 6 months, 9 months. And then we're like, okay, so the likelihood this thing was going to fail through is not very, it's not very high.
Because of all the name brand banks that are investing, HSBC, that's right. And it's like those people don't make bad high risk investments very often, and they certainly don't all do it together. Right.
So we feel as well, it's like a strong investment and looks it's going to be safe. That's why we invested. It wasn't, nobody know. So what happened was, after we invested, I think it was like in about 3 years or so, it was listed in Hong Kong. I remember right, and my memory served me right, it was listed at $9.80 a share. We bought in about $2.30, $2.40 a share. Mm-hmm. It was listed at $9.80 a share.
Wow.
If I could have sold, I would definitely take some chips off the table just to cover my costs, right?
Sure, yeah.
But I can't, because I have my sharehold in China, and China have capital control. So you cannot get your money out of China. You ship your money out of China. So I cannot sell. I have to sit on it, despite, and then 2 years later, and then we went up to 18 and all that. 2 years later, after that, so about 5 years after investment, I think it was listed in Shanghai Stock Exchange. It was listed at 32.80 a share. So rich is what? I don't know, 15 times my investment.
Yeah.
Right? But again, because we have such a block, we have a 6 months lock-in. We cannot sell. If I could have sold, I would sold an IPO, take some of my chips off the table. So we cannot. So we got a 6 months lock-in. In the 6 months, the stock went up to 160 a share. The high was 160 a share. But we have a lock-in. We cannot do nothing about it. By the time I came out of lock-in, the shares were trading at $65 to $70 a share. And then at that moment, I sold all my shares. So I made what, 25 times on the money. But the thing is, you listen to what this happened. It's not by my design. It's not my smart. It's not my design. It ended up to be 25, 30 times, but it's just not by design. It's complete luck. Well, okay, it's not entirely luck when I do the deal, but
the timing of the sale. Yeah.
That ride of 30 times is not my smart. It was the market is with me.
Right.
And I just happened to be. So when New York Times came out of the story, said, these guys makes like, I think we make like, I don't know, I don't remember, like 200-300 million on it. And the Wen family make almost close to $1 billion on it.
Wow.
And, they say, oh, this is corruption. It's like, damn, 6 years ago, who the heck knows this thing gonna go up like 30 times? Nobody knows. Come on.
Like
if it's gonna go up, if anybody knows this thing gonna go up 30 times, do you think you're gonna sell at that price at the time? Right? I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, so that was the insurance deal. I mean, it was just a lot of luck. I mean, the trend is with me.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
Yeah. And you have a similar deal with the airport deal. We don't have to go over all those details because there's a lot of really interesting things in the book that people can read about as well. But the money finally starts rolling in, especially after the airport deal. And it sounds like, I won't go into all the details on how you guys went crazy, but a couple choice things here. Ferraris, cars, fine. $15 million colored diamond, but that's not the most interesting. The most interesting thing was a $500,000 watch, which is the same one that apparently there's like 10. Vladimir Putin has one. Where is that watch now? Did you keep that thing?
Yeah, I have it.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it was Whitney gave me as my birthday present on my 40th birthday. And then it was, my name's engraved in it. So I
mean, I would be afraid to wear, let alone own anything like that. I'm not going to ask you where it is. I'm going to Google this and see if there's an image that comes up, because I won't ask you to show it to me, because I'm sure it's not in your house. You're too smart for that. But this is real wealth. Like when you're buying a $15 million colored diamond and a $500,000 watch for someone's birthday, now you're on another level, right? This is almost going to space money now.
No, interestingly, the people, read my book. I mean, that, I think the book, if you go into Amazon, US, I think that, out of 5 star, it's rating at a 4.6 or something, 4.6. So it's, it's very good rating, right? But if you look at the critique of the book, the guys who give me 1 star or like, this is garbage, a lot of it is they're just offended by how I describe how money was spent.
Yeah.
A lot of it. And they're like, this is a corrupt, decadent, lifestyle, how dare he come out to speak about it, right? Giving my background, giving, what I've been through in the last, 40, 50 years of my life, I know this is going to come if I write it the way I write it. This is not, and then giving them my situation, I'm not writing this to show off my wealth.
No.
There's no need for it.
It doesn't come across that way. Yeah.
No, what I want to do is the way I spend money wasn't unique to me. It was common among that class of people. And my book is a record of last 20 years of rise of China. I want to show the world, first of all, I want to tell the truth. The second thing is, by telling the world is my lifestyle, essentially I'm telling the world is how that class of people in that period in time in China look at wealth and how they relate to wealth and how they spend wealth. So that's what I want to do with that book. With that, those stories. The second thing is, interestingly, if I may conclude, which I didn't write in the book, is China I talk about how poor a background I came from, but that wasn't unique to me. Like 99%, except that 1% of the Red Aristocrat, they live in a different world. That's what China was. $5, making $5 US a month in the 1970s wasn't unique. It was actually $5 a month was considered middle class in China at that time.
Wow.
so everybody in China essentially came from nothing. So when they come out all of a sudden with this kind of wealth, I made this description. It's like caveman coming out of a cave.
Mm-hmm.
It's like caveman coming out a barren cave, and then look at like, wow, there's so much in the world I can take. And then we were just taking everything and then sort of experiencing life to the fullest and say, well, how does that change me? How does that, what does it mean to own a Rolls Royce and then drive it and all of a sudden? Or what's it mean to have a jet, all of a sudden? I talk about in a book, it's ridiculous. I mean, we have 3 jets going to Paris for a trip, right? It's like 4 families. We have 3 jets, and then end up actually 2 jets were just empty jets following around because everybody wanted the same jet to play cards.
Just like, let me just highlight this. You brought 3 jets to Paris for 4 families, but everyone ended up flying in one so they could play cards. But the other 2 followed anyway because who cares about the $150,000 it cost to fly to Paris in a private jet, right? Like, unbelievable.
But the thing is, I was writing that, and I was so amazed. I relate that to my my company, people who were together on the trip. I was like, think about it. Only 20 years ago, if every one of us, if we can think like when we get to be adult, we can buy a brand Phoenix of bicycle. Is a Phoenix is a bicycle brand out of Shanghai, is supposedly the best bicycle of China. If we could, in an adult who own a Phoenix brand bicycle, we will consider like really lucky, quite successful. And today, that's 10 of us going to dinner in Paris and then in 3 jets. I mean, look at that gap and how much a jump it was, and it has been. It was astonishing, the jump, right?
Yeah.
And just reflect on it.
It's really incredible. I mean, what you did in what you built in the book was really, really something incredible. I want to highlight again the idea of connections in China being so strong. I knew that this was a thing, but it's so much more than I ever imagined. You discuss, it's kind of an anecdote where you say officials and party leaders and entrepreneurs, they literally have 3 dinners per night, like one at 6, one at 8, one at 10, and then a tea drinking meeting at midnight or whatever to continually foster connections. It's like a full-time job. Was that every day, or did you mean like once a week people are doing this? Or are these officials doing this like 5 nights a week?
Probably 5 nights a week. Wow.
They're spending like 40 to 60 hours just on connections and relationships, huh?
Yeah, I mean, because, we talked about earlier, we are all dancing in gray zones. If you want to achieve anything in life, you need to encourage your counterparty to come into the gray zone to dance with you. So, but how do you convince the other party to come into the gray zone to dance with you, and then we can together build something, achieve something? You need to build trust. And how do you build personal trust in China's situation? You need to spend time together. You need to read into each other and say, well, is this guy really trustworthy? Who's his connections? Mm-hmm. Is he going to backstab me? Right? And then so that's why time is never enough in order to build relationships, because you talk about we talk about just like 3 dinners. Even the order of that 3 dinner, that's an order to it. So usually what happens? So in China, dinners supposedly don't start at 6:30. So all dinners, so 6:30 slot is the slot you reserve for the most respected person. So the person who is like sort of in a hierarchical society, a rank above you. That's just like Auntie Zhang, we always will have a dinner at 6:30 with her if we're having dinner with her, right? And then we have another dinner starting at 5. The person who you have dinner at 5 is in a hierarchy is ranked lower than you, so they don't mind to have dinner at 5 with you. Because they know they are ranking lower in the society. They want something from you, and then but they appreciate you are willing to do the dinner, first of all, and willing to spend the time with them. So although you give them the 5 o'clock slot, they're like, okay, that's fine. But for the people rank above you or you want something from, you definitely always have to be the 6:30 slot. The 61st slot is reserved for that. And then you have an 8 o'clock slot, right? The 8 o'clock slot, it will be more people who are sort of level with you in terms of, in the hierarchy. And then it will be maybe your friends or people who are already close business associate. So they know you are busy like before that, but they appreciate you coming out to have the 8 o'clock slots, right? And then you have the sort of the wind down, the wind down time with your buddies, after the third dinner. And so it goes on like that.
It's wild, and it makes me feel like, when do you sleep? You must not sleep enough when you do stuff like that. And everybody's on 5 hours of sleep all the time.
I spent 8 years in the airport project, and after that, I sold the project to the Singaporean. One of the main reason I sold that project is because that project is so draining physically. I mean, I'm literally drinking half a liter in every day
of alcohol,
of 53% proof alcohol.
Oh my God!
And sometimes more than half a liter every day a week. I'm like 6 days a week. I'm drinking that much. And I just like, I get to a point, it's like, I have enough, I need to get out of this game.
That would be so exhausting. And now, okay, around this time, China, I should say the Communist Party starts to sour on entrepreneurs. And the wisdom becomes, make your money and get out as fast as you can. It kind of reminds me of this Jack Ma issue, right? Everybody was like, oh, Jack Ma's so great, he's so powerful. And then he sort of, I guess not even sort of, he vanishes out of the public eye for a while. And it really highlights the idea that everyone who's wealthy in China, or everyone in China, is ultimately a tool or instrument of the state. Now you have Elon Musk and all these folks, like, they're really public and they're kind of doing whatever they want in the United States as entrepreneurs. In China, that doesn't fly, right? No matter how high you get, and especially if you get really high, if you become the Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk of China, like Jack Ma, you become even more of a puppet or instrument of the state. And at this point, I know you have to have Chinese Communist Party officials inside your company, on the board, or at high levels. It's really an interesting juxtaposition, because you start off by like, all right, everybody in China loves a good, wealthy entrepreneur. And then it was like, actually, we're kind of done with you guys. You made enough money. You've developed the country a little bit. Give us the power back. And that becomes unhealthy, right? You said in the book, the party has an almost animal instinct towards repression and control. And anytime the party can afford to swing towards oppression or repression, it will. So it sounds like the reforms toward capitalism and the free market were relaxed, like you said, in 1979, because the country was so broke they needed money. And then they swing back to repression and control, I guess because, like you said, the party has an almost animal instinct towards repression and control. It seems like they would leave things open, but that's not what they did, right? They went straight back to, all right, let's clamp down on everything again. Why do you think that is?
I think, first of all, since 1949, the Communist Party took over China, political power trumps everything. So we just talk about Jack Ma, right? I mean, for a very long time, I think maybe still today, he is still the richest person in China, right? The richest person in China, it doesn't mean anything in front of the political power. The way like Xi Jinping, not even Xi Jinping, even, not even going to need to go that high up. Like a minister, or people like them looking at, the richest person in China, they're like, who the heck are you? Mm-hmm. I can chop you off, and tomorrow I can put a Peter Lee onto it to be the richest person in China. Doesn't change a thing. So political power trumps everything. Wealth doesn't mean anything. That's why every wealth owner in China stash money away, whether it's Switzerland or Hong Kong used to be, And now today it's a lot of their money in Singapore because they know the private property is not protected. The party can come over and take over anytime.
Yeah, you do see a lot of wealthy Chinese people moving money abroad. I would say hiding money abroad, I guess, because I know that some of that is illicit transfers of money. I'm doing a show about this as well. And after the sale of the airport share, you wanted to move your money abroad as well. You say in the book, CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, allowed private property rights in 1979, but what the party giveth, the party can taketh away. So it's actually safer than to stash money in real estate investments in the West, in Canada, New Zealand, United States. And you also note that former senior officials are forbidden from leaving China. I did not know that. Is that still policy? Like if you are a high-level official in China, you can just never leave the country at all again?
Yeah, it has been more stringent and more enforced.
Wow.
So obviously you get, essentially, if you are minister and above, you will never get out. You never leave China. And then vice minister then under, then will be selected cases.
Even so you can't even go on vacation or anything, right? Like
No.
you're just stuck in, you have an exit ban, no passport, basically.
A lot of times these days I talk about, CCP essentially almost like a mafia.
Yeah.
And then once you join, you are in for life. There's no such a thing called walking away alive.
Yeah, that is definitely an analogy that I've heard used many, many times on this show. It certainly seems apt given what I'm about to get into here now. So this Western news agency, I think it was Time Magazine, they blow up a story about super wealthy CCP officials, and your wife, Whitney, she kind of has to fall on the sword in order to protect people above her like Auntie Zheng. And let's talk about this Bo Xilai story. So who is that? And this blew up in the West as well. There was a movie about it, but I can't remember what it was. I saw it. Do you know what I'm talking about? It was they sort of dramatize how this businessman was murdered.
So Bo Xilai is a second generation. His father is he is the head of economy, economic minister in the 1950s. So one of the most senior official in the 50s and the 40s. Bo Xilai, as same as Xi Jinping, he's a second generation, and he was essentially openly challenging for the top job, which is unusual because usually in China, this kind of situation is always dealt in the back room. And you trade cards, and then you you figure that out in the back room. He was using a populist movement in the province in the Chongqing. It's a city of 30 million people. He was the head of that. He was running a populist movement over there, essentially to jack up his profile, and essentially openly challenged for the head job. And he was actually destined to get into the Politburo, which is the 9 person top executive body of the Communist Party. He was about to get into it. And then the police chief of his municipality run into the American embassy.
Oh, wow.
That caused his downfall. And then, obviously, subsequently, they charged him with corruption, and his wife also was charged with corruption and also killing an American business person. Is it British?
He was British, yeah.
A British person, a British business person. Yeah.
Right. So she poisons this British businessman, and then they burn his body and say, "Oh, he drank himself to death" or something like that. So Bo Xilai goes to prison for life. His allies then are digging up dirt on Auntie Zheng. Your wife Whitney gets caught in the middle of that net, and Auntie Zheng she wants to donate all of her family's assets to the state to avoid prosecution, which is also very Game of Thrones. And this kind of thing just seems to be the norm in China. And you mentioned this in the book as well. If you look at the list of the richest people in China, it's always changing. So every few years, there are 80% of the people or whatever are gone from the list. And the reason is because the chess pieces have moved and they're no longer in favor, and a lot of them are dead or in jail at that point.
Yeah, I mean, China has essentially have the richest person, the list about 20 years now. And then if you look at over the 20 years, I would say there will be about 7 people who are like the richest person, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe of that, let's just talk about those 7, 8 people. I would say probably 2 of them went to jail, and 1 of them just came out like 2 years ago. Like a couple of them disappear, essentially sort of fell off, and then fell off so far you won't see their name anywhere. And then you have Jack Ma, we know how much trouble he is in, being the richest person in the last 4 or 5 years now. So the top 100 list, if you look back, I would say probably 20% of them, somehow happen to be in jail subsequently. And then you got another probably 20-30% of people just fell off the list and you never heard of them. It's just how much does the environment changes and how fast does it change?
Yeah, that to me is, again, as an American, it's pretty wild. The other thing that's crazy is, so your wife, she gets an exit ban from China, again, forbidden from leaving. And it's so crazy that the government can prohibit you from leaving the country without being convicted of a crime. Like if you're convicted of a crime, okay, might be a parole condition or something like that. But they can just say, hey, you're not allowed to leave suddenly, no due process. And then she disappears. And this is the part that is just Twilight Zone bizarre. So she vanishes. You start making calls. Nobody knows anything. And your sources tell you she was probably drugged and beaten up, and then they'll probably inject something in her spine and she will come out a zombie. What is the point of that? What does that mean? Are they literally going to inject her with something and then she comes out a zombie? Or is that like a euphemism that I don't understand?
So what happened in her situation was beginning of 2017, she was banned from leaving China. And the way this is very common, banning people from living in China. So what happened was they don't even notify you. What happened is that you take your passport, you go to the airport, and you find out at the gate of immigration officer, well, you're banned from leaving. That's how you find out, actually. So she about 6 months, so she was banned from leaving beginning of 2017. And then in September 5th, she just vanished. She vanished. The reason I assume the state have taken her is, first of all, she was banned from the state, by the state, from leaving. Secondly, is on the day she vanished, 3 other staff of her were vanished at the same time. So 4 of them vanished on that day. And then 3 of the 3 staff was disappeared for 3 years. And all 4 of them never been charged to today. Never been charged. 3 of them were vanished for 3 years and then reappear 3 years later. So a year ago, they reappear. In the process, never been charged. And then she came out 2 days before my book came out. And call me to cancel the book launch.
Right. So to clarify,
yeah,
like her phone, you've been calling her for 4 years. Her mom's been calling her every day for 4 years.
Yeah.
And then you write this book. She could be dead for all you know. And then suddenly she calls you on the phone from the number that had been dead for 4 years. That's the part that's crazy. Like, I wanted to highlight that. I don't mean to interrupt you, but the idea that you've been calling this person for years and their mother's been trying to reach him, no dice. Suddenly your book is going to come out. There's a press release and she calls you like, oh, hey, long time no see. By the way, don't publish your book. I mean, what? Your phone line is dead for 4 years. The news of my book comes out. Suddenly your phone works and you can call anybody in the whole world? Like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, that was the crazy thing. I mean, the reason I published a book, it was you talk about like taking a shot down the spine. It was about a year and a half after her disappearance. I was in London talking to this friend he's one of the most respected economists in China, and then he looked at me and we were having coffee together. He looked me in the eyes. He said, she most likely not. They will never let her out, right? And I was like, all right. And then he said, like a matter of factly, like if they let her out, they're gonna give her a shot down the spine, she will come out as a zombie. That's the part I really shocked, because he looked at, I mean, we know each other, we know him for a decade, and he's an economist, he's not even a security guy. And he talked it as such a matter of factly, it sounds like it's like a known practice. And that's the part that really shocked me. It's just like, really? You can do something like that? I mean, the state can do something like that? And they will do something like that? Because we know, the reason she was taken was most likely to be political.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they took her for years and years, and then we never charge her, because obviously she has some inconvenience fact for the state. They don't want that to ever come out. That's what happened.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's so insane. Obviously, you can't go back to China, and you never would. You probably don't even want to fly over China at this point.
It's more than China. I mean, first of all, I can never go back to Hong Kong. I mean, Hong Kong is such a part of China. I'm pretty sure if I land in Hong Kong, I would never come out. And given that they have kidnapped people, in different countries, so in countries that have very close relationship with China, I wouldn't go. Like country like Thailand, right? Thailand, there's a bookshop. Many of your audience may have heard of it. The bookshop published basically a satire on Xi Jinping, and then the CCP went ahead and kidnapped and arrested everybody from the bookshop. They kidnapped the owner, who is a Swedish national from Thailand.
Wow.
And the guy, and that's 6-7 years ago, and that guy's still in China. They put him on TV to renounce. He said he went on TV and said, I don't want my Swedish passport. I don't want to be a Swedish citizen. I want to be a Chinese citizen so I can sit in jail, essentially.
Yeah.
They put him on TV to do that. And then there is major newspaper. They have stories like Dubai. Like China runs a dark cell in Dubai. They were kidnapped. They were taking
a dark cell.
Yeah, they were arresting Xinjiang. The
Uyghurs. Yeah,
the Uyghurs. And then arresting them in Dubai and shipping them back into China. So I mean, there are countries like that. I obviously can never touch one.
Wow, that's terrifying. Yeah, I mean, the reality is, you're one guy and you're going against a state like China. I don't want to. I'm trying to think of a diplomatic way to say this, but the truth is, if they really want to do something, the resistance you can put up is pretty minimal, right?
Yeah, that's. I mean, before I book, I mean, there's a lot of struggle before the book came out. I consult people who this kind of situation, like Bill Browder. He wrote a book. Yeah, Browder wrote a book on Red Notice, right? Actually, he's a friend. I consult him like, how should I arrange my security, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, but reality is, it's me versus a state, a party with 90 million members, second largest economy. That's absolutely nothing I can do. If they want me dead or they want me anything, right? That's very little I can do. But in that regard, I have to say, America is the safest country in the world. I mean, I do, I have been in dialogue with the FBI in the US. They are very good compared to, what I've seen and experienced in Europe.
Really? So
it's another class above. It's another.
Really?
They are protective, lot better intelligence, and they're willing to do things about it.
That's interesting. I have. I'm trying to think of what I can say here. I have had some experience with Chinese intelligence operations and the FBI in the United States, and they take things seriously. Where you would think, oh, they're not going to believe me, they're not going to care, and they do. Not only believe you, but they are on it. They are, and it was surprising to me too, because you don't usually expect efficient police response from the U.S. government about something that sounds kind of insane, right?
Yeah. I mean, given my experience, I really have to say, I mean, I tell them myself. I mean, I tell the Brits and I tell the Europeans, the American FBI just another class above you guys.
That's interesting. But you're still UK based. So yeah, come on, Scotland Yard. Get on it, right? Are there I mean, I know there's a lot of CCP agents in the US, especially in the United Kingdom. Do they harass you at all?
So far, nothing has happened. So we're like, cross our finger, like, keep it that way.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. You were friendly with many people in Xi Jinping's inner circle. How do you assess his character? Do you think he's a socialist zealot like many people seem to think, or is he more on the other end of the spectrum?
I think first of all, I think, he really, he's a second generation. He sees himself as an emperor to rejuvenate the dynasty.
Mhm.
That's how he sees himself when he come on, when he get on a job, and then 10 years ago, 2012. And then so he has a vision. Well, I don't know about vision. He wants to rejuvenate and re-engineer the entire country to the ideals of the Communist Party, and then to give Communist Party such vitality they can rule forever over China. I mean, they actually put it, change the constitution again and put it in there. The Communist Party going to rule over China forever, essentially, and that's what he wants to do. And that is I think for everybody, including Chinese in China, that's the most dangerous thing, because he is re-engineering the entire country in every dimension. And then every one of us don't know what's the end state he has in mind. I'm not sure even he knows where's the end state he has in mind. But he's definitely, whether you look at the tech industry, the education industry, the state of the private economy, the relationship with the West, with America, and then he's re-engineering the country, restructuring the country in every dimension. In his view, that's for the longevity of the party's control over China, and that's the where it's going to end. That's the most dangerous thing.
Yeah, especially looking at what's happening with Russia and Putin. It's like a lot of times dictators' end game is, well, I'm going to die and I don't really know what's going to happen after that. And it's like instability, infighting, possibly war. Hard to say. But these guys aren't necessarily thinking about how it's going to end for everyone else. That's not really in their nature, is it?
In Xi Jinping's mind, the relationship with Russia and Putin is enemy of my friend, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So in his mind, in CCP's mind, the biggest threat to their existence is America, is the United States of America. So enemy of my enemy is my friend. So who are their friends? North Korea is their friend. Yeah. Iran is their friend. I mean, they signed a contract for $500 billion to buy oil from Iran, right? And Russia is their friend, right? So so that's no way they're going to ditch. They're going to manage the relationship with the rest of the world, but they're not going to ditch Russia despite everything's happening right now with Ukraine.
Yeah, for sure. No, that totally makes sense. I guess, I'll end with this. You mentioned this interesting anecdote where you marched in a counter protest in Hong Kong. So like a pro-Chinese Communist Party protest in Hong Kong. This is before you had escaped, obviously, and left China. And you mentioned that everybody had been bussed in or flown there, and that it sort of was almost like a big performance, right? Everyone's trying to get brownie points from the party. It seems like the answer might be obvious, but I'm curious. What do you think of this now? People fighting for their right to freedom in Hong Kong, and other people, including yourself, are over there so they can avoid prison, gain favor for a business deal. The idea was capitalism and freedom are these bad things, and the very people asserting this in a protest are doing this because they want to make money in China. Right? So they're saying, no, you don't get freedom. You don't get capitalism. That's bad. But also when I go back, I want a contract to build roadways in Xinjiang. And because they had absolutely no freedom unless they did the party's bidding, right? So doing CCP bidding purely out of fear and self-interest, it's got to sting a little bit, right? What happened in Hong Kong since the CCP took over. What do you think? I mean, there's got to be at least a little bit of guilt for playing a tiny role in that, even though you were just a pawn.
That's a long story, but actually I just talked about it this morning with somebody. But I know that happened 10 years ago. 10 years ago, and I think reality is, I think 10 years ago, how I look at China, how awake I'm to the CCP is very different to what I'm today, and how the world look at China 10 years ago, and it's very, very different from what it is today.
Definitely.
So I'm not. So I'm not. It's part of my explanation why I did what I did 10 years ago.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I just figure hindsight always being 2020. This is not a judgment of your character.
But today, if you're still giving what's happened to Hong Kong, giving what happened to Xinjiang, to the Uyghurs, and giving how how they're backing up the Russians, what's happening in Ukraine. If you're still speaking up on China's behalf, on CCP's behalf, it's hard to explain now.
Agree. And hey, thank you very much. You've been very open and generous with your time. The book is really interesting. A lot of cool insights. And I appreciate your perspective. I mean, you were really in the high elite. You were rubbing elbows with the red aristocracy, and now you are spilling the beans. And I think me and my audience certainly appreciate that. So thank you very, very much.
Well, thanks for your time. Thanks for giving me this opportunity.
Thanks for checking out this entire episode of The Jordan Harbinger Show. If you're interested in exploring this topic further, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. We dive even deeper on this and many other topics. In the audio podcast, I also close open loops, cover things discussed off air, and give some parting lessons from our guest. You can find The Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any podcast app, or at jordanharbinger.com. And also, if you found this episode useful, please share it with those you care about. Last but not least, like, comment, subscribe.